The Manument Podcast is back, ladies and gentlemen. Aren't we glad it is? There's so much positive energy, so much wisdom that radiates from the founder of Jabez Financial, registered investment advisor Glenn Johnson. I'm your co-host, Doug Turnbull, and Glenn and the team would love for you to be in touch at 860-390-0093, 860-390-0093, or by going to jabezfinancial.com. Based out of Uncasville, Connecticut, Glenn and the team not only can help you in many phases of your retirement, they believe in the 5 F's: faith, family, friends, fitness, and finances, to make sure and to help you in your pursuit of not only healthy money, but also a healthy lifestyle. And with that said, Glenn, I'm so glad you could carve out the time. We're recording on a Friday here. Those are always days that people smell jet fumes and smell the weekend. So thanks for making the time, sir.
Happy to be here, Doug, and I'm glad you are as well. We've got a lot of exciting things to talk about today.
Yeah, we do.
And it's great when they say average people talk about events, but great people are not. They're talking about ideas and where they're going, how they're improving their lives of not just their own, but those around them as well.
Yes.
So these are some exciting times. There's a lot going on, lots of changes. And not only do we want to be well prepared for the next one, we want to keep in mind of what's coming after that.
Oh, absolutely. No, you got to have your eye on the prize, as Philippians 3:14 says. Look, Glenn, by the way, everyone, you need to know, if you didn't remember, has authored a chapter, if I could talk, in the Motivation Manifesto book with Les Brown. He and some other influencers, if you will, Glenn Johnson, have worked on this book here, the Motivation Manifesto. You can find a copy of that on jabezfinancial.com, where you can also find all the cataloged episodes of this show. And you can find the Manument Podcast in Apple, Spotify, and some of the other podcatchers too. In fact, last time we were out, if you want to jump into the show library, we talked about the idea of having too much self-reliance, not relying enough on the people around you, and then also how to have, or why it's important to have, those hard conversations. All right. So check those out again at all the podcasting places and under that tab at jabezfinancial.com. Today, we're going to talk about, Glenn, the unfortunate thing, because life just isn't fair. I'm sorry, it's not. And what happens when your seasons or cycles of life don't match up with the seasons or cycles of the economy? So maybe you should explain what these are, and then what happens when the waves don't perfectly match on the graph sheet there.
That's right. The seasons is a common topic. We're always talking about, we've got the winter, spring, summer, fall, and we're always preparing for what's next. Well, there's economic seasons as well. There's corporate seasons, there's business seasons, there's seasons that financial institutions, whether it be banks, insurance companies, investment houses, they'll go in and out of seasons between raising capital, investing capital, sowing, reaping, planting. We've got all these different seasons, but they don't always line up. And that's where we talk about there's different seasons of life. We've got our education, which is our spring training. And then we start working and we start growing and we go through our accumulation years. And, that's where we're growing. That's where we're earning money. But then we've got the distribution seasons. Well, if your prime earning years are during an economic season that's on the grow, like it was from 1982 all the way to 2000, and that's when you're earning money, That's fantastic. But what if you were retiring in 1982 during a growing market? Or what if you wanted to start working like I did in this industry at the peak of the dot-com bubble? That's when I got started in the financial industry.
Oh, man.
What if you're getting in and you're working and the market's on the decline? So the seasons of life don't necessarily match up with the seasons of the economy.
Well, that's a great point. And it's almost like it's not fair. What if someone was set to retire in 2008, right?
Well, I met a number of people in 2009 that said I was planning on retiring and now I can't.
Oh, yeah.
And they just remind me of the horror story that they just experienced a few years earlier in the dot-com bubble.
Yeah.
Well, those stories, they're not just once in a lifetime stories anymore. They were telling them after the dot-com, they were telling them after the '08. But if we look at where the market is now, just about every major market sector has been peaking. And we're looking at like a long-term peak, not just a spike where it drops and comes back. But when we have like the Russell peaked about last year, the Dow, the S&P, China last year, China's economy peaked. And then before that, it was Japan. We've got global economies that are peaking all at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's a perfect setup in a market that's way overpriced for a decline that not necessarily everybody is prepared for.
That's a great point. Yeah, as when everything is up, eventually it's going to come down. I think it's sea level has to exist somewhere, or else maybe the economy is not so high after all. If it's just high all the time, right? And now, Glenn, I want to think about there's two angles that I see anyway. There's preparing for this financially. How does a financial advisor, I know we talk a lot about the life coaching and such in here, but you are a financial advisor. So how does a financial advisor help someone not just completely feel like the bottom falls out when the economy does decline, if these waves don't match up? And then there's the psychological aspect. And I know you're not a psychologist, but you do help coach people through these things. So maybe let's tack how the financial advisor helps with the actual greenbacks first.
Well, 25 years ago when I was in financial planning school, one of the things they talked about was the rule of 100. Right. And here's that basic benchmark where if you're 60 years old, you should have 60% of your money in bonds, 40% in equities. And then when you're 70 years old, you have 70% of your money in bonds and 30% in equities. And they just say basically how old you are, that's how you split up how much your balance should be between stocks and bonds. Now, that's a very generic approach. And if you're just looking at the seasons of your own personal life, well, maybe that's fitting. However, if the market's in a free fall, I don't care if you're 20 years old. It doesn't make sense to have 80% of your money in equities. So from a financial planning perspective, we have to be mindful of the mechanics of the economy and the fundamental direction it's going in and the season that it's in, and have that have a greater a greater influence over the allocation models that you're using than your specific age. Now, obviously, even in a growing market, we don't put 90% of your money in equities when you're 85 years old. Obviously, right. So that there's that contributing factor as well. But unless somebody is staying on the ball and somebody's staying on top of it, somebody who can walk alongside you and help you choose what allocation model you should have, somebody that's not just familiar with you personally and your circumstances, but also has a sound fundamental understanding of where the market is and the direction it's headed. We've got to consider both of those elements when putting together a plan that's going to be right for you.
And by the way, you said 25 years ago, you were in financial planning school. So that means over roughly the last quarter century, you have seen an umpteenth amount, and that's a small number, of retirement. So you've seen these, whereas someone is dealing personally with their one retirement or a household's one or two retirements, you've seen it over and over again. So that helps you also not only have redundancy in plans, but now here we go. And in our last minute or two here, deal with the emotional part, what the urge is to do versus what the right thing is to do, and how people shouldn't crumble under pressure.
Right. And this is where education is everything. Nelson Mandela, he said education is the most powerful weapon you can use into which to change the world. Yeah. And by increasing our financial education and working with someone you can trust, the greater understanding you have for what you have and the reasons why you have the holdings and accounts and investments that you have, the greater your education, the deeper your understanding, the more financial peace you have. And that way, because the more you understand and know about it, now you're making smarter decisions right out of the gate. And when things start to change, you're able to have the discernment to be able to recognize when it's time to make a change. Right. So education is everything, and having the right relationships with people that know you well make all the difference in the world.
Relationship is the right foot forward at Jabez Financial here, Glenn. And I know when you encourage people to call to get their first, that complimentary just talk with you, right? Just sit down. Eventually, you do get to brass tacks, both TACKS and TAX, okay? But eventually you get to that. But first, it's just getting to know you, and it's the relationship first.
That's what matters most, because how can you honestly make a really good recommendation for somebody if you don't know them personally? That's why I make a real effort to get to know people personally. So when it comes to scheduling a conversation, that's what I'm looking for, is to call the office, schedule a conversation. Let's get to know one another. And then how we're able to work together will reveal itself.
So make that first call, everyone, 860-390-0093, or tell someone, maybe they're struggling with this or going, oh my gosh, well, look, the economy's already done. I don't know how many 180s this year, but at least one big 180 or two maybe since April the 2nd, okay? So there might be people on all sorts of edge, whether it's you or someone you know, 860-390-0093, or you could go to jabezfinancial.com and fill out the contact form and set up that first appointment with Glenn and the team there and just start kind of feeling this process out. As Glenn has been saying, it's almost inevitable that at some point your season in life isn't going to match the season of the economy that you need. And by the way, Glenn, there's a chance to meet you not just in one-on-one, but also a chance here on Independence Day. Explain the Monument Freedom Farm again.
Yes, on the 4th of July, 6 p.m. at the Monument Freedom Farm in Oakdale, Connecticut, we are celebrating freedom. Yes. And it'll be up there between the more freedom, where it comes to our faith, family, friends, fitness, finances. We're going to have all the yard games. It'll be catered. People will bring a dish. We'll have a lot of exciting things. There's a lot to look forward to. But, to get outside of your normal comfort zone, meet somebody else that may be in the same situation as you are, or somebody at a different stage of life that you can either speak into their life or obtain some wisdom from somebody else. It's a great event to meet some other people that are celebrating freedom in all respects.
That is Celebrate Freedom, July 4th, 6 p.m., the Monument Freedom Farm in Oakdale, Connecticut. If you click the events tab at jabezfinancial.com, you can get exactly the address and everything, but you got to RSVP. So you can RSVP to either the number we keep saying or to KML at jabezfinancial.com. RSVP to KML at jabezfinancial.com or call and reserve your spot in the office, 860-390-0093. Glenn, we appreciate you lending your time here as always, and I look forward to hearing more about Celebrate Freedom and so much more from you here.
Thank you, Doug.
The pleasure is mine. Glenn Johnson's a registered investment advisor at Jabez Financial, and the Monument Podcast, these come out roughly every 2 weeks, so subscribe, turn on notifications, and if you've heard something you think can be helpful to someone else, hide it under a bushel. No. You're going to let it shine. Send that link to someone else, too. Make sure they know about it. I'm your co-host, Doug Turnbull. Big thanks to our producer, Rob Scott, of the ones and twos getting this thing published, and to all of you for listening. And we'll have another episode of the Monument Podcast coming your way here shortly. Stay tuned.
Investment advisory services offered through Jabez Financial, LLC, a registered investment advisor firm. Registration is not an endorsement by securities regulators. By contacting us, you may be provided with information about insurance products, including annuities offered through Glenn Johnson, Connecticut Insurance, license number 4628409. The firms are separate entities. Annuity guarantees rely on the financial strength and claims-paying ability of the issuing insurance company and are not offered by Jabez Financial, LLC. Read your contract for restrictions, limitations, or penalties. Jabez Financial, LLC is not licensed in all 50 states. To find out if Jabez Financial, LLC is licensed in your state, please call 860-390-0093.